Now, a former university in northern Syria has been transformed into a makeshift prison for suspected fighters from the Islamic State group. In it, hundreds of men and some boys are left lingering in very cramped and inhuman conditions. Some Belgian, some British, some French. Their native countries unwilling to bring them back for trial. And that is a sign, our guest today says, that the extremists have in some ways won. Investigative reporter Mr. Allan Kaval, welcome to the show. Thanks for coming in. Can you start simply by telling me what you have seen? You were one of the rare people to get access to this internment prison.
Well, what you see when you go there is basically like a makeshift prison, full of perhaps more than 2,000 inmates living in classroom-size cells, like 100 to 150 people by cell. Hundreds of them are of terrible physical condition. Some of them have been wounded in the last battles of ISIS, because you need to know that these inmates were all captured in Barouz, which is the last point that ISIS controlled earlier this year, at the beginning of the year, and they were taken over by the Kurdish forces and the coalition in April 2019. So these people are the last, perhaps, fighters or followers of ISIS that did not surrender or were not killed in combat situations, and they are living in this. This is the hospital of the prison, and so they have very basic, treatment that do not allow them to be cured in the right way. And each week, each month, some of them die, of course, of this not ill treatment, but the absence of treatment.
Indeed, and dying then without telling the full extent of their story, without going on trial, without justice, as you've pointed out, for many of the victims. You've spent a good number of hours in this prison. Yes. How willing were they to talk to you? What did they tell you?
They were willing to talk to us, because they have absolutely no idea what's going on outside the walls of the prison. For example, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi had been killed a few days before we got to this prison, and we were not allowed to tell them, because the Kurdish authorities were afraid that if we told them about what was happening outside, the Turkish invasion, the death of al-Baghdadi, they might not be able to control the situation in the prison. Even if those prisoners are very weak, most of them are very sick and ill, the Kurdish authorities were afraid that they might not be able to control the situation if they knew that the Turkish army was entering Syria and that the coalition had killed their former leader.
Indeed, a volatile situation. But one of the men you spoke to, a child really, he's just turned 18. You've given him the name Morad. Can you tell me a bit about him and his story? I mean, brought to the war by his parents when he was very young.
Absolutely. He was 12 years old. It was at the end of the summer. Back in 2014, he was about to go to school, the end of vacations, but he never got to start his new year in middle school. He was taken by force by his parents to Syria. When they told him they were going on a vacation to Turkey, he realized at 12 that he was actually in a war zone. And so the years that he lived between 12, so the end of childhood, and 18, the beginning of his adulthood, were either in the totalitarian system of the Islamic State, in which he lived and when he was indoctrinated, or in cities that were bombed by the coalition, on roads that where he was fleeing these cities that were being bombed, then on this awful Barouz battle, and now in a prison with no legal existence, with no, completely forgotten by his own government, and not given the assistance a young boy like him you would need.
Perhaps the extreme example of countries distancing them completely entirely from their own citizens, because there is that question of bringing people back for trial, which isn't happening.
It's not happening, and the case of this young man is especially telling, because, well, he was a child when he was taken to Syria. He didn't want to go there. He didn't have any idea about what he was going to do there. And so this shows that government do not take their responsibilities, even with the most vulnerable cases. So there's just a policy to just forget about them, put them in these areas, and so that They stay there and they don't cause any problem, or just have to forget them, that's all.
And of course, you've been writing a lot about the potential consequences of that tactic and, really what it reflects on our own weapons, if you like, or systems of justice.
That's right. The thing is that when I got there, I had the very deep feeling that the Islamic State somehow had won something. They lost this battle of Barouz, but when you look at this jail, you see that they managed to, let's say, make us, and by us I mean democracies, countries where the state of law is supposed to be applied, they made us doubt of our own principles, and they made us doubt of the force of law, of the principle of law, and of justice. And so we stopped tackling this issue by, let's say, okay, let's do justice to the victims. Let's find out what happened. Let's find out who is guilty of what, who is responsible of what. No, we just put these people in a jail where they're slowly dying in order to forget them, because we believe that our law system, our legal system, our democracies are not fit for tackling this issue. Is
it the fear then, if, say, for example, France brings some of these men and boys back to France, that they will be set free?
There's a fear that even if they are not set free in the
short term,
like in the longer run, they might pose a threat to the security of France. And also most people in France do not want these people back. Even this young boy who is now 18, who has absolutely no responsibility in what happened to him when he was brought to Syria by force. Well, he is seen as somehow contaminated by the ideology of the Islamic State. And so there is this sense of he's going to get back to France and bring this disease of the Islamic State with him. And this is how people tend to see the situation. And this is why they tend to believe that our legal system is not ready and up to it.
And meanwhile, leaving people there, of course, you've seen it yourself, not perhaps in the prison, but in the camps for women and children, that people become all the more radicalized.
Yes, actually, I was in touch with French women from who joined ISIS, and they, a few months ago, they were slowly showing signs, and perhaps were not very sincere, but slowly showing signs that they had got away from the ideology of the Islamic State. And then, with the weeks and the months passing, more and more they were more radicalized. They were re-radicalized somehow, and because they don't see anything coming, and they're with their children in these tents
and feel abandoned.
And they feel abandoned, of course. And they just want to go to France to face justice, and perhaps that for their children to have a better life. Some of them, at least.
Incredibly complicated and quite frightening situation, Mr. Allan Kaval. Thanks so much for coming in and telling us a bit more about it. Allan Kaval, investigative reporter who travelled to northern Syria with photographer Laurence J. We've been seeing some of the pictures and indeed images also from Agence France Presse.